This is the thing about space travel. It's scary. Like anything can go wrong at any minute. There's a reason why visiting space isn't as easy as visiting your favorite theme park. Just getting the space shuttle off the ground takes some serious science, tons of money, and lots of risk. And unfortunately, sometimes those risks can prove fatal. When the Space Shuttle Challenger was flying the mission number STS-51L on January 28, 1986, carrying 7 astronauts, including one ordinary civilian, a high school teacher, blew up 73 seconds after liftoff. Space Shuttle Challenger was the most complex machine ever built with more than 2 million parts joined together. An internal rocket ship part called an O-ring, a sort of a rubbery tire for keeping the super hot rocket gases from leaking into the wrong places, malfunctioned because it got too cold in the winter air. And because of it, the one flight that would have made the space travel a routine then blew up into millions of pieces and the dream light shattered on the ocean floor.
So now let's do an EGAT analysis of the ethical issues in this case. Since NASA knew that the O-rings can potentially fail and that the colder than usual launch temperature would further jeopardize the O-rings, NASA violated clauses 77.1, section 2, 3, and 5. They also violated clause 77.2, section 1. From the professional misconduct, clause 72.2, section A, B, and C were also violated. Some courses of action would have been to do nothing and proceed with the launch, which is exactly what NASA did. Another alternative would have been to delaying the mission until correctly redesigned O-rings are used and suitable temperature is met for the launch. Third alternative would be to blow the whistle, which in this case would have been ethical because the engineer did report that the O-ring was unsafe to use under certain conditions and management still decided to go with the launch. The advantages of the first alternative are that mission proceeds as decided. However, the disadvantages are that all the clauses mentioned earlier from the Act are violated, and also lives are endangered. The advantages of the second alternative are that none of the clauses from the Act are violated and no life is knowingly endangered. However, there are disadvantages like the cancellation of the mission and extra costs to repair the O-rings. The advantages of the third alternative are that public welfare is kept paramount and disaster is prevented. The disadvantages are that the whistleblower potentially loses their job and NASA's public image is negatively impacted. The best course of action for NASA in this case would have been the alternative number 2. This is because NASA would have complied with all the clauses mentioned in the Act and public welfare would have been kept paramount.
In this section, we'll be determining laws, legislation, and engineering standards relevant to the Space Shuttle disaster. A tort law compensates a party for injury due to another party's negligence. There does not need to be a contract between the two parties. To prove that tort law is appropriate, it must show that 1. The defendant owe a duty of care to the plaintiff, 2. The defendant breached the duty of care by his or her conduct, and 3. The defendant caused injury to the plaintiff. We will assume that the parties involved in the Space Shuttle disaster are the deceased astronauts' families as the plaintiffs and the government, NASA, contractor, and O-ring engineer as the defendants. The government had a duty of care to the families because they must ensure the welfare of the public. However, they are not liable for damages because they relied on NASA's special skill for the O-ring design. NASA owed a duty of care to the families as they should ensure the safety of the astronauts. NASA breached this duty of care because they proceeded with the shuttle launch knowing that there was a problem. NASA is liable for damages. The O-ring contractor also owed a duty of care and breached it due to their negligence. They signed off on the launch even though one of their engineers reported it would cause a catastrophic failure. The contractor is liable for damages. The engineer did not breach his duty of care as he took due diligence to report the O-ring issue. He will not be liable for damages. This is relevant because in a legal defense, one must demonstrate due diligence. The engineer reported the potential problem in writing and was legally protected. However, the disaster still occurred even though he took the appropriate steps. The Space Shuttle disaster is an example where due diligence does not guarantee that a disaster won't happen. Internal resources were exhausted and whistleblowing would have been an appropriate step to safeguard lives. Whistleblowing is an extreme step but one which could have prevented this disaster.